Oh my God, it's finally here. Jean Grey, issue 1 by Louise Simonson and Bernard Chang. And I gotta tell you, Familia, I have been waiting for this issue to drop ever since it's been announced.
Amelia, Power of X-Men, we're with.
I love that.
Do you love Power of X-Men?
I love Power of X-Men. Of course I do. Do I? Yes, I do.
I don't know what I was expecting. I have a lot of notes because, of course, we're a crazy Jean Grey fan here. So we got notes. But I got to tell you, I was a little nervous seeing the solicitations for this because I was like, oh God, it's gonna be just like all over the place. I'm not too sure what this is supposed to be. Spoiler alert for everyone who's tuning in. We're going to break down this entire issue and we're going to go through it panel by panel. But my general comments would be is that I thought this was going to be a retelling of Jean Grey's origin story, or it's going to be something that doesn't even acknowledge the Hellfire Gala. And I have to tell you, it does. I mean, the very first page, we get Jean in what appears to be the White Hot Room. And she says, I'm going to read it. I'm dying, but there's nothing new in dying, at least for me, been there so many times before. But what about the others? I know there are others, just don't have a clue who they are, and time is running out. Do I know this, or is it just a feeling? Never mind, forget it. What I don't know. Move on to what I do know. This is my fault. It has to be. Why else would I be here? So what did I do wrong? Think, try to remember. If I can understand, maybe I can fix everything. So boom, the first page right there dives into Jean in presumably the White Hot Room. I think it's pretty clear at the end of this issue that she's in the White Hot Room. And she's going to try to go back into her past and see where things went wrong and sort of the mistakes she made. Now, here are some general feels I have on this issue. One, I think Louise Simonson knows Jean Grey very well. And we're going to dive into why I think she knows Jean Grey very well. Two, I don't think Louise Simonson is up to date with all of the stories, unfortunately. I'm sure, listen, there's plenty here, but there are certain beats in the story. I was like, well, why didn't you mention this with what happened during Bendis's All New X-Men? Why aren't we talking about Krakoa there? This reads very much like a what if, which is ironic because the solicitations say that this is not a what if. And you're going to have to convince me otherwise. I'm going to have to see the other issues, kind of going forward to sort of be like, okay, fine, it's not a what if. I mean, this is very much Jean Grey looking at her past, going back to try to fix those past, see how that kind of plays out. And then she's like, oop, didn't play out right. Let me move on to the next moment in my life. So let me rewind. Let me break this down. I'm going to give you a general premise on this issue, and then we'll dive into the actual panel by panel and our overall thoughts. But the general premise of this first issue, and again, final spoiler warning, Familia, final spoiler warning. Jean Grey is dead, and she's meditating on her life, and she thinks, well, where did it all go wrong? So she is going to be visiting seminal moments in her life where she thinks things went wrong. So because there was a Hellfire Gala massacre, Jean thinks that there's something in her past that could have prepared her for this massacre. So the first moment she visits is when she and the other O5 came back to the past after the extermination arc, right? So Bendis's O5 came to the present. They go back during extermination, and right before, they reassimilate into the past, Jean wipes their memory, and no one remembers that they were in the future or the present, however you want to say it. For them, it's a future. For us readers, they're in the present. So she wipes their memory, and Jean, current Jean, Hellfire Gala Jean, who died, thinks this is a moment where things went wrong. So she reaches out to her past self. She kind of like hovers over her and makes her say, actually, you know what? We're not going to forget anything because this is going to help us prepare for the future. And so she keeps all of the O5's memory. So from there, the scenario plays out. And what happens is Jean is being very proactive. She's going up against Trask. She's making sure that mutants are being hunted and killed. She becomes very obsessive about it. Phoenix is lingering within her. She turns into Dark Phoenix. The X-Men unite to try to stop her. She kills everyone, and that kind of world fades away. And adult Jean, Hellfire Gala Jean, was like, wait, I guess that wasn't the moment. because I ended up killing everyone. There must be another moment. And so she turns to her next seminal moment, and it's the space shuttle flight where she turns into Phoenix. And obviously, we know from the solicitations that Jean is going to probably come in and say, what if I said no to the Phoenix and someone else gets the Phoenix, right? I think that's a solicitation. It's a big what if, right? Let's see how that kind of plays out. So right off the bat, there's something I really do like about this issue is that it reminds me a lot of Here Comes Tomorrow, Morrison's Here Comes Tomorrow, where Jean ascends into the White Hot Room and she looks into the past for the moment where everything went wrong, which is when Cyclops walks away from Emma and Here Comes Tomorrow future sort of comes to pass. So Jean says, ha, live, Scott, live. And she pushes Scott to be with Emma. That's exactly what's happening here right now. Jean is in the White Hot Room. She's wondering what happened. So she's looking into her past and sort of refixing everything. So in that regard, I think this is a continuation of Here Comes Tomorrow. In fact, I would say you could read Morrison's Here Comes Tomorrow, Phoenix, and Song, and then dive into this Jean series. Now, listen, you're going to miss a lot in between. Well, maybe not so much since Jean was dead after End Song, just dead after End Song. But I think there is a through line there. And I think Louise Simonson is picking up that thread. So what did I say earlier when I said that I think Louise Simonson understands Jean? I think she understands Jean's power, right? She understands that Jean can go into the past as Phoenix in the White Hot Room and sort of replay reality a certain way. And if it doesn't work, she can just amputate the future. So that's exactly what happened in this issue. She amputates that timeline when she sees her past self turn into Dark Phoenix and annihilate everyone. She's like, I guess this like timeline didn't really work out. So I'm just going to amputate this and I'm going to look at this. Surely there must be something here. Now, there's another scene where they're trying to rescue a mutant, and Jean's like, I can't telekinetically pull that mutant out of the building because I'm too far away from him. I love that. I love that sort of limitation with Jean's power, that she has to be a little bit more closer in proximity, right? There's this other scene where Jean and the O5 are battling Magneto right after coming from the future. And Cyclops is like, Jean, you're more than just a telepath. You're also a telekinetic. And she's like, oh, you're right. And she lifts Magneto's helmet off his head, which is something you're like, wow, why don't they always do that, right? Magneto's helmet blocks telepathy. It doesn't block telekinesis. So that is absolutely perfect. I love that. But in that regard, I really love that Jean is in the White Hot Room and she's going through all of these moments. Which moment is it where everything went wrong? I don't know. It's anyone's guess. We know the next issue is going to deal with the Phoenix and the space shuttle flight. And we know issue 3 is going to deal with Madeline Pryor. So what do the last 2 issues deal with? I don't know. We're going to have to see. And we also know that Jean will be back in Immortal X-Men. That's already been announced. So she will be back. And she, to no one's surprise, Jean was never going to stay dead. And we knew that Jean was going to live. So again, what I'm really happy about with this issue in general is that a look at Jean's history, not a retelling of her origin story. It is a big what if. I don't know what the point of it is, in terms of like what if stories, if we're only going to get like a beginning, if it's only going to bookend a beginning and an ending where Jean sort of has these meditations. I don't know. We'll see as the series unfolds what we're supposed to get from it. Maybe by issue 4 and 5, we'll get some more fleshed out stories. One of the things that I really wish for that they would do with Jean is examine the time between Phoenix End Song and Phoenix Resurrection, right? The Tom Taylor in the X-Men Red Annual sort of says that she was a Phoenix, she burned bright, and then she was dead. And we know that's not the case. We know at the end of Here Comes Tomorrow, Jean was very much alive and operating on a cosmic level. We know she manifested throughout these years, and most notably in AVX. So it is curious to me when people are like, oh, Jean was just dead in that interim from Phoenix End Song and Phoenix Resurrection, especially since we knew Jean had to go back into the White Hot Room and find all her pieces, right? That was a big plot point leading up to Messiah Complex. And the second coming was that those Phoenix shards were being collected by Jean. Even Rachel says, no, not now, Mom. So we know Jean wasn't just dead. And I wish Marvel would do what they did with Phoenix Endsong, which is take all of this Phoenix lore that you've already established and just streamline the story. That's what Greg Pak did in Phoenix Endsong. He took all of those stories that seemed so out there, so hard to comprehend, and streamlined the story and made sure everything was connected. That's what I was hoping they were going to do with Phoenix Resurrection. I don't know if they're going to be doing it right now here with Phoenix, with this Jean Grey solo, right? I hope, if I had to put my bet on it, what was a seminal moment that really defined Jean? I think it's when the Phoenix brought her back in Phoenix Resurrection. We've never gotten an answer as to why the Phoenix resurrected Jean all of a sudden. The Phoenix was going after Teen Jean, and Teen Jean rejected it, and then it resurrected adult Jean. But why didn't it resurrect adult Jean years before? Why was it coming for Teen Jean to begin with, right? Again, I've said this on the podcast before. I wish the Phoenix would have said in Phoenix Resurrection, I brought you back because something big is coming. And that something big could have been the Hellfire Gala. It could have been Fall of X. It could have been whatever. But they never really sort of tackled that, right? In Phoenix Endsong, we get this wonderful moment where the Phoenix says, so I came back because this yearning I feel for this world is you, right? And it's also baked into the story that the Shi'ar reconstituted the Phoenix, and they were shocked that the Phoenix manifested without Jean. And we find out that Jean was in the White Hot Room, and she was supposed to be with Phoenix, and she was confused. She's like, why aren't you with me? And then at the end, we find out that the reason why Phoenix was lingering on Earth is because of Jean, because Jean is the Phoenix and Phoenix is Jean, right? It doesn't make any sense to me that in X-Men Judgment Day, Jean Grey, they say that you are the Phoenix. It's like, yes, this has been very, very much established for decades now, and you haven't done anything with the story. You've just regurgitated that story. Here, I'm curious if we're going to actually get some of these answers. That's one of the things, again, I wish with Marvel, to get a little salty here, I really wish that they would focus on the stories they've told instead of trying to tell newer stories with the mythos, right? I feel that they keep editorial when they do interviews. They're like, oh, the Phoenix is such a complicated thing, blah, blah, blah. And then they tell a Phoenix arena story. Then they give the Phoenix to Echo, and then they're doing what they're doing now in this issue where it's kind of like nebulous, like Jean is with the Phoenix. They're not like, let's take what you have, right? Oh, and let's not forget the Avengers BC with the Phoenix, right? And being Thor's mother. Just take the stories you have right now and streamline them. Just tell a really good story like Greg Pak did, right? I mean, War Song was a horrible follow-up film. And I love the art for War Song. It was a collaboration with Top Cow, and Tyler Kirkham was doing the art. And I love the art there. I love the style of that story, but it did not make any sense. All right. Let's go into this issue. I'll give much more thoughts as we're going through it, but get comfortable. We're going to talk about Jean Grey. So again, we open up with that shot of Jean. We really don't see a background, but she's, she knows she's dying. She doesn't have much time, and she has to, find out what happened. She wants to find out what went wrong and how she could have prevented it. Now, the fact that she says that I don't have a lot of time, that actually is reminiscent to Grant Morrison's Planet X, when Jean is killed by Logan as they're entering the sun, and she awakens as a Phoenix consciousness. She goes, you did it, Logan. You released the Phoenix consciousness, total mind over matter. I had to die to come back, but I don't know how long they'll let me stay. Right. And who are they? How does Jean know she doesn't have much time here? Everyone's, your guess is as good as mine, but I would say it's like the Phoenix core, right? That idea that in the White Hot Room, all these Phoenixes gather and they operate on a cosmic level, right? Quentin Quire says it. They told me to tell you to hurry. And she's like, wait, before I go, I just want to fix this universe. I want to push Scott to be with Emma to avoid that Here Comes Tomorrow timeline. It's all very complicated, even saying it out loud, but it's complicated. But if you read it and you meditate on it, it starts making sense. But anyway, so Jean here, let's say it's they again, are letting her know she doesn't have much time. So she goes through all of these moments in her mind. And this is very reminiscent of Bendis's Jean Grey splash from issue 5 of All New X-Men that Stuart Immogen did. And it's all of her memories from when Annie got hit by a car to when she got turned into Dark Phoenix, to Madeline Pryor, to the O5, to her powers manifesting, to Kid Cable. Now, one thing I want to note here is that in certain shots, she seems to be in her Hellfire Gala costume from year two. So her standard X-Men uniform now. And then in other shots, she doesn't appear to have it at all. I don't know if that's on purpose. I don't know if that's supposed to signify something. The first shot we see her kind of walking into those memories, she is in a white background, so assuming the white hot room. And then in these other shots, she's like a pink telekinetic energy being, and she's just going through these different places. But here's the thing, these different places in her mind. But here's the thing. Check it out here. She is holding her past self, and this is where she resets the timeline. She's wearing her X-Men costume there. So I don't know. Is that on purpose? Is that something we should be noting? Is that just an art thing? I have no idea. But anyway, so we get to the O5. And Jean's like, you know what? We're going to keep our memories, and the memories, we're going to make it work so they can be better prepared for tomorrow. And then they do a danger room sequence. And we find out that after everything they've been through by being in the present/future, they were able to breeze by this danger room scenario. And Jean is like, well, Magneto is attacking Manhattan. And Xavier's like, well, you already knew that. And Jean's like, because the barriers you put on my mind are no longer there. I can use my telepathy. I can control it. And me being at full strength puts us in a really great position. So they go up against Magneto. And Jean is like, you are nothing but a mutant terrorist. We've seen where your radical ideology gets us. And that's when Cyclops is like, Jean, you're telekinetic. There's more than one way to stop him. And so she lifts that helmet off of Magneto. And Jean, wipes his mind, or sort of say, I don't know what she does, but he's left in a comatose state, breathing, but in a comatose state. And Jean uses her powers to influence the public perception on everything that just happened. So we see people holding signs that say New York City loves the X-Men, and the X-Men are sort of like celebrated heroes there. And we find out that Xavier was none too happy with Jean and everyone for what went down with Magneto. So they sort of move out into this fabulous apartment up in the skies of Manhattan, thanks to Warren's inheritance. And Jean uses an enhanced cerebro that Hank created to sort of track some mutants. And we see a mutant who Trask was going afterwards, and there was a building that exploded, and Jean was trying to get him, but she couldn't get him on time, and he dies. And she's holding him as he dies, and she feels his death, and Cyclops runs to her, and she's like, it's okay, I've been through this before. And so what they're trying to do now is assemble X-Men, people who they know will be X-Men. So like Danny Moonstar, Kitty Pryde, Sam Guthrie. And they're taking them in because they want to be better equipped for everything that's happening with Trask and all this anti-mutant rhetoric that's happening. And so they go back to the mansion, and Xavier says, I believe in free will, and I trust that in time he will become a force of good. I'm surprised that this development displeases you these days. His and your philosophies seem aligned, in reference to Magneto. And Jean's like, I would never be a terrorist. And Xavier's like, the way you're going, give yourself time on this. And so, when Jean was collecting like Danny, Sam, and Kitty, she was wiping the memories of their families and to let them think that they were going to boarding school. And Jean was sort of taking them with them on the team. And Beast is talking to Trish, saying that, like, listen, you're hearing this wrong. We were saving them. And Trish is like, no, you're taking them away from their families and wiping their memories. So what the heck is that? And then Jean kind of like psychically attacks Trish, and Beast is like, what are you doing? You're a monster. And Jean's like, I'm not a monster, and attacks Beast. And that is when we find out that the Phoenix has been lingering within her, and she becomes Phoenix in this universe. And she goes around the universe stopping anti-mutant rhetoric. So then Magneto, Warren, Cyclops, and Iceman put on like enhanced cerebral helmets to try to stop Jean. And Professor X is there too, and he's talking to her, and he's here like, you just have to stop it. And she's like, quit talking, quit fighting me, all of you. I can't think, just go away. And she incinerates all of them. And so our Jean, kind of was like, well, that isn't what I wanted. It isn't what I meant at all. And so she's sort of in her Phoenix costume. It's like a blacked out Phoenix costume. I guess it's supposed to be the Dark Phoenix costume that she's wearing. I don't know. It could be anyone. It could be that other costume that Rosenberg had for her in Phoenix Resurrection. But she goes, me alone, no one else but the Phoenix. Horrible, wrong. My idea, my willfulness, my pride, my fault. Gone. I've learned that option no longer exists. We were right to let the skein of time unwind without entanglement until I see it now, the next possibility, the next choice. I know exactly where it all went wrong, and it's a space shuttle flight. So, again, it's for our first issue, it's a total what if. And I don't know how I feel about that. Again, I'm glad it's not an origin story. I'm glad we're seeing Jean sort of being meditative of her life. But one of the things that I don't understand is why didn't they address the fact that Xavier Magneto would know about Krakoa by this point, right? Moira, Xavier, when he was still doing his PhD right there in the carnival. So he would know about Krakoa. He would know about the multiple lives. I don't know why that's not sort of factoring in on this story. I also don't see why Jean would look so much in the past for something like this, why she wouldn't look at Utopia, why she wouldn't look at Genosha. I would love a story where Jean goes back during those 16, 13 years that she was dead and sort of sees everything that happened there, especially with the Phoenix Five. Can you imagine if Jean looks there and she goes, this is where it went wrong? Because Hope should have been allowed to repower the mutant race from the get-go. And because we got the Phoenix Five and because we got, Utopia, that's where things went wrong. We should have let the mutant gene be repopulated with Hope. So I don't know. It's not a bad first issue by any means. I don't think it's boom, blowing your brains on the Jean mythos. I kind of went into this not expecting anything, so that's probably why I like it more. I will say I think the writing's really great. I think Bernard Chang's art is gorgeous. There's some parts that I think are a little like rushed, but I mean, again, you're doing a comic book on a monthly basis, on a monthly title here. So I'm sure there are certain panels that need to be rushed, but I wish the writing would take into account everything, like the way that Greg Pak did in Phoenix and Song, because again, I think Jean going Dark Phoenix in this timeline, Xavier would have been like, well, we've had multiple lives with Moira. We know Krakoa is sort of like our endgame there. Why wouldn't she confront, Xavier, like, wait, there's something in your mind that that we don't know yet. And that's Moira is, a mutant, and we have multiple timelines where we fail, and you're thinking of establishing something like Krakoa. You know what I mean? And sort of what I wish they would have addressed here. Maybe, if I were Jean dying in the White Hot Room, thinking about where everything went wrong, I would say, wow, when I went back, let me keep my memories. Let me read Xavier, see what he's thinking. Oh, there's a mutant nation. Let me establish Krakoa early on, so our security systems are much more bigger. And also, again, like, of everything the mutants have been through, the massacre at the Hellfire Gala, which when you start thinking about it, wasn't that big of a massacre at the Hellfire Gala. I mean, Jean and some other mutants died, but that's a handful of people who died. Bobby's okay. Those 250,000 mutants are in the desert. They're just fine, right? We can assume Mystique is going to be okay because we're going to see her popping up in X-Men Blue Origins. We'll see where that goes. But I'm curious why this is so catastrophic for Jean, right? And also, like, the one thing Jean has died multiple times in her history, but also in the Krakoan age. Does she go to the White Hot Room every single time she dies? These are questions I want answered, especially out of a Jean Grey story. And I really wish an editor would come in and be like, hey, you know what? Your voice for Jean, Louise, your voice for Jean, your understanding of Jean is absolutely perfect. But why don't we move away from a what if title and let's tell something a bit more present, like Jean in the White Hot Room, and let's try to streamline all of her history together instead of creating all these different timelines. I mean, it is interesting. Is Jean creating these universes? I'd be interested to know, but let's see how the series plays out. Maybe it's just going to be the first 3 issues that we're just going to get what if stories, and the last 2 will be a bit more meatier. is Jean going to come back with the Phoenix? I think Jean will come back into the present with the Phoenix, because we saw again in Immortal X-Men, Irene sort of saw all the things that have yet to come. One of them including Exodus leading the mutants in the desert. Another one is Jean with the Phoenix hovering over Earth. So that is our breakdown for Jean Grey issue 1. Again, not the best comic I've ever read, not the worst. So it's not Phoenix Ensign level by any means, but it's not a dismissive what if story that you don't need to visit. I think it's a fun look at Jean. The first page and the last page really have me excited for where the story could possibly go, but I'm kind of tired of stories and where they can possibly go versus what is actually given to us. I wish some of the editors again would come in and just like really have an ironclad grip on what they want readers to get out of this book. And in this case, for me, I would say this should be a book dedicated solely to the Jean mythos and Jean stance, and making sure you streamline everything. Phoenix Ensign was #1 when it published back in, like, what was it, 04, 05? It was #1 on the comic sales chart. If you respect the history of the character, you streamline it, people are going to come to it. A Jean Grey dying story. She's in the White Hot Room. She has to come back to Earth to save her fellow mutants. Epic story already. So I don't know why we had to segue with this what if, but you know, if it's Jean looking at her seminal moments and sort of thinking what went wrong, I'm here for it, but I really want to be able to get something out of it as a reader. What did you think of Jean Grey issue #1? Did you like it? Are you happy with the direction of the series? Let us know in the comments below.